call us to order at 8:33. This meeting, just to let all of you know, I have asked Farley to record this meeting. Our council liaison, Nancy Fortune, cannot be with us this morning, and she requested that we record the meeting for her. And I'll also let you know that because we're meeting this full city council in a special session next Tuesday evening, I also intend to pass this recording along to Denise for dissemination to the city council so that they are up to speed about the work that we're doing and the actions that we're taking today on the LaFund development. So I'm hoping that there are no objections to that. Hearing none, I've called us to order, and I would like to note some changes to the agenda this morning. Because the development agreement is the biggest thing that we have on our agenda, I would like to move it to the top of the agenda so that we can take care of that business and let all of these fine folks from Paragon Development go on their way while we take care of other business. In addition, I am going to add an item under other business today, and that is to discuss our meeting next Tuesday with the City Council. The council has prepared a draft agenda and shared it with Jim and me, and I would like to share it with all of you and take your comments to make sure that we're prepared for that joint session. So I'm going to add that at the end as well. Are there any other proposed changes to the agenda from any of you? Okay, hearing none, I am going to move then to item 7, new business. The item is consideration of an agreement for the acquisition and development of a portion of the Manitou Springs East Corridor Urban Renewal Area. I did not move to public comments first because those of you who are here today from the public, my expectation is that this is the item that you'd like to speak about. We will take public comments in just a bit. So if you can just hold on, I'll get through the introduction of this item, and then we can hear the presentation from our own staff and from Rich Block and the folks at Paragon. Just to bring everybody up to speed, this item comes to us as the Board of Commissioners for the Urban Renewal Authority. This agreement comes to us today so that we can determine whether or not it meets the requirements of the Manitou Springs East Corridor Urban Renewal Plan. This plan was adopted by the Manitou Springs City Council in November of 2006. And I know that several of you on this board today have been with this authority since its inception. So I'm just the storyteller today, but I'm certainly not the historian. There are people far more knowledgeable about these matters than I am. The plan, when it was adopted by the council in November of 2006, governs our work as a board. And the reason for that is because at the same time that this plan was adopted, the Manitou Springs Urban Renewal Authority was created, and this Board of Commissioners oversees that authority. So we have specific duties and requirements that we must follow. The corridor plan specifies that we undertake redevelopment activities in order to reduce, eliminate, and prevent the spread of blight within the corridor and stimulate growth and investment within the area's boundaries. With the adoption of the plan in 2006 and the creation of this authority, we, the board, were given powers to acquire land, redevelop land, and enter into redevelopment agreements with property owners and developers. And that is exactly what we're considering today. So I want to give you a little bit of history about this LaFun development itself, so that you understand the conditions or the context in which our board is considering this agreement today. In October of 2021, our board entertained a proposal, an informal proposal, by a group called Boardwalk Partners. Boardwalk Partners had entered into discussions, negotiations for a contract with the owners of the LaFun property. The LaFun at that time had been closed. Their business license had been revoked by the city of Colorado, or city of Manitou Springs, because they were not able to operate appropriately under the codes of Manitou Springs. So Boardwalk Partners had expressed interest in redeveloping the LaFun property as a boutique hotel. And they came to us with their design concept. We gave them our input. We wished them luck and told them that if they were successful in negotiating a contract with the LaFun, we would be happy to work with them on a development agreement so that we could offer the incentives that were available to us as an authority for their redevelopment. They were not ultimately able to agree on a purchase price. However, one of the members of the Boardwalk Partners group is also a member of the Paragon team. And I'm sorry, there's someone who is not muted. If you could please mute yourself, thank you. So the Paragon team then took a look at the Paragon property. And by February of this year, Jim Reese, our executive director, was in conversation with the Paragon developers about acquiring the property and redeveloping it. That brings us to today. So between February and today, our board and our staff, Jim Reese, have been in conversation with Paragon Development about the development agreement that you see here today. A lot of this is new news to many of you in the public, and that is because this deals with property acquisition and a real estate transaction. We're not actually allowed to speak about this publicly, because to do so would basically leave the developer in a position with no leverage, no ability to really negotiate a favorable terms for acquiring the property. So we held our conversations confidentially in a series of executive sessions, and have arrived at the terms that you're going to see presented today. So with that background, I am going to ask for the following process to take place. I'd like for our executive director, Jim Reese, who has successfully negotiated this agreement. I'd like Jim and our attorney for the Urban Renewal Authority, David Neville, to present the terms, a summary of the terms to all of us. And then Rich Block, I'd like you and your team to give your comments next. After that point, I'm going to open this conversation for public comment. And those of you who are here listening today, if you would like to make comments, I'm going to ask you to give us your name and address and try to limit your comments to 3 minutes if you can. We'd really appreciate that. And then after that, I'm going to ask for closing comments from our staff and the Paragon team. And then our board members will get a chance to ask questions, make their own comments, and will consider a motion for the development agreement itself. Does that sound fair? Does anyone have any questions or concerns about that? Okay, with that, Jim, I'm going to ask you, pardon me, Alan, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions that would be directed towards our staff that it might be worthwhile to ask them up front, but that's just my thinking that to wait till after all the other stuff, it's some of my concerns or confusion might be solved by talking up front, but whatever you want to do. I would prefer to ask before all the presentations.
I mean, what say you, group? Farley?
I say proceed as planned.
Okay.
I agree.
All right. Alan, I'm hoping that a lot of the questions and concerns that people have will be covered by Jim's presentation and the comments and remarks by the Paragon team. So I guess it's my preference that we take everybody's comments into consideration and questions for the staff at the end of the presentation and after hearing comments from the public. Jim, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen here. I'm not really the greatest at this, but let me see if I can do this. Hold on. It's not giving me the options that I want. Well, sorry about this, but I can't get to the file I want to share with you. So I'll just talk about it. And what I want to do is basically go over the summary sheet that I sent out to everybody. I'm not going to go through every line item on the agreement or the TIF advance note or the deed of trust, but I'll summarize those for everybody. And hopefully you have that copy that I sent out with all the agreements. So anyhow, under the development agreement, which obviously is the big item we're here to talk about today, I'll talk about the developer's obligations, our urban renewals obligation, and then some of the terms that really are the highlight of the agreement. And then I'll ask David if he has any comments or Rich to if I miss something. So under the agreement, and this basically stipulates who's going to do what as far as the acquisition, payment, and redevelopment of the property. And then conditions of, what happens if something goes wrong or there's a default. All those things are spelled out in the agreement. So let me start with the developer's obligations. Paragon is a developer and it will be acquiring the property. They are to provide $1.1 million in equity for the project. And Debbie, did you do that?
I did.
Okay, so you can see now we're on the first bullet point there, acquire the property, provide 1.1 in equity. The next part, and this is pretty important, is Paragon will also be doing all the asbestos abatement and demolition and hopefully have that completed by April 30th, 2023. Asbestos abatement, we still don't have a good number on, but we're working on that and hopefully we'll have that fairly soon as far as the cost. But the budget that we've identified, as you'll see down further, is $600,000. They are then to put together a concept plan of what the redevelopment will look like. We're anticipating that to be either a commercial development, retail, possibly restaurant, or possibly even including housing, but mixed use would be our druthers on that. So that will come forward to the board at some point in the future for review. And by the way, all the plans that are developed here will have to be submitted to the city as part of the development review process. So you'll have a development plan in the whole 9 yards. Urban Renewal does not get involved with the actual approval of construction documents and that type of thing. then once all those are approved, then they are to construct the commercial or mixed use development as per zoning code, and then comply with the terms of the advance note and deed of trust, which I'll go over here a little bit down further. Urban Renewal's obligations under this agreement is to provide $1,550,000 advanced loan for the purchase of the property. And there's some terms to that, which I'll go over. And then also to provide up to $600,000 in the advanced loan to complete the asbestos abatement and demolition. And again, Rich and his team are still working on narrowing that down. He may have more to say about that. And then what we will do is also collect the future tax increments that are generated by this project. And that will go toward paying back the note of the total note of $2,150,000. And that's important to note that this is kind of a typical urban renewal, but a little bit, just a slight twist. What we're doing here is providing the funding up front to complete the acquisition and the demolition. Whereas if you recall the Holiday Inn process, we did it the other way around, is that the owner of the Holiday Inn is doing all the improvements, and then we'll get paid back over the remaining period of the urban renewal plan. So we're putting it up front, but we'll be keeping all the tax increments to repay the Urban Renewal Authority for their costs. So that's kind of the difference there. As far as the terms of the advanced loan, Urban Renewal will fund $1,550,000 after this agreement is approved. And then $600,000 is the max for the completion of the asbestos and demolition costs. And that will be paid as per a contract with a contractor who will make partial payments on that as work is completed. There is a 2-year lien period, and this is important, with 1-year extensions if the developer requires it. And that is basically to ensure that something happens on this site. If nothing happens within the 2-year period, we can negotiate to extend the loan on the time on. It's going to cost $25,000 a year to do that from the developer. But the idea is within that 2-year period, we believe you can get the property all assembled, demolition completed, a plan in place for what's going to happen, and hopefully line up tenants and that type of thing for the type of users that's going to go in there so the construction can begin. We're allowing for 24 months for construction, hopefully less. And then this deed of trust will end with the certificate of occupancy, meaning the project is done and ready to be opened. Again, if a development doesn't occur, repayment of Paragon and MSRA funds is dispersed from the property sale as per section 4.1B in the agreement. And that spells out how the money is if the property has to be sold, if nothing occurs, how basically both parties get funds back. And of course, obviously that's contingent upon what the actual sale price would be. So that's basically the highlights of that. The advance note, basically the disbursement, how the disbursement of the 2.15 is distributed, how MSURA retains all the future TIF funds to repay the note. Deed of trust is basically is a collateral on this property, and all the conditions of default are spelled out in there as well. The deed of trust, basically total amount is $2,150,000 to be paid by Urban Renewal. The initial money, the 1.55 is to go toward the acquisition costs. The 600,000 is for the abatement and demolition, as I mentioned before. The property is pledged as collateral, including land improvements and any future improvements. The developer is required to maintain, insure, and pay all the taxes on the property. And it basically has instructions for if the property has to be sold and in the event of a default, how the public trustee is to handle that. David, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, good morning, board. David Neville, Council TRA. I think I would point out, Jim, that just a couple of conceptual points here. One, I think there's a clear understanding among the staff and the executive team and the board and those board members who have heard this before that that the note is not going to be fully repaid before the urban renewal area times out. But that's okay, because when the urban renewal area times out, the tax revenue then goes to the city, which really is equally as good, right? It's a win for the community if there's a development here that is a revenue generating development. So I think we understand this is an investment in the community here that won't be fully paid back, and maybe people will see that, but then accept that that's it's equally as good just to get the La Fawn demoed in short order, and then have a plan to hold the developer's feet to the fire to erect the development, revenue generating development within the next few years. So that's one conceptual issue. And the other is, with regard to holding the developer's feet to the fire, the first priority lien is executable if under the conditions that you see as the development doesn't get started, but then it becomes subordinated to a construction loan when there is a construction loan, which is also okay, because at that point, a construction lender won't be funding unless the developer's ready to build. So at this point, again, when construction starts, that's really where we see this as a win for the community, because at this point, we can be pretty certain that it will end up as a tax revenue generating project that replaces the La Fawn Motel. So just those conceptual points there, Jim, that I think are important.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Okay, Rich, I'd like to hear from you and the members of your team at this point. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Debbie. Members of the board, just a quick introduction. My name is Rich Block with Paragon Realty. Our offices are at 8700 North Street, Suite 310 in Fishers, Indiana. One of the members, as Debbie mentioned, is my son. He is the one who identified this property to us. He lives in Lakewood, Colorado. So we're excited to be doing something in Colorado. And I do want to acknowledge and thank Jim and David for their help and working what amounts to probably 9 or 10 months looking at this property, exploring options, ultimately what we consider, an agreement being drafted that offers us help with the property, but also I think affords the URA a lot of protection. So I do want to thank Jim in particular for that. We see this site as being one that is, really, I'd say almost the perfect redevelopment candidate, in that, I think its current use is, I don't want to say blighted, but I'll say underutilized. And, I know and I'm aware of some of the problems and history of the site. But I think the benefit that it has is that it's very well located, and we believe has tremendous potential. So that's what sparked our interest. Like so many redevelopment sites, this is very expensive because there is an existing business and such on the site. And I think that's what's led to, the challenge of capitalizing the project. Part of the reason that we're working on this is that we sold another property and we're utilizing our 1031 exchange proceeds. That's that $1.1 million that was mentioned to purchase this property. Quite frankly, that's a good thing for everybody, because I think it affords a little more timing flexibility and patience. And, and I say that because I would have loved to be able to today present to you a very specific plan, but unfortunately, honestly, the contract with the seller took a while to get negotiated. It was not an easy process. It remains one that, quite frankly, we're trying to work through because our deadline is strict. We have to close. So maybe some of you know this, but with a 1031, you have 180 days in which to close on the replacement property. Well, that's next Friday, the 26th. So that's creating the urgency for us. I do want to take a second, though, to highlight or maybe just explain to you what Jim had alluded to with the abatement and the demolition. That's turned out to be more involved than we originally thought, primarily because of the asbestos that's involved. So we have been speaking to 3 or 4 contractors ourselves. We know that, well, the brokers representing the seller are also talking with 1 or 2 contractors. And we have a couple bids, one of which was to do all of that was at one point $1.3 million. Quite concerning. We have other bids, though, that we're working on that are less. The lowest we have right now for complete is a little over $850,000, but there's some additional testing there. So we actually went ahead at the recommendation of one of the abatement contractors and demolition contractors to do additional testing. That testing is ongoing. They're out there this week and through early part of next week, but then they have to send the materials to a lab to get analyzed. I'm learning a little bit, honestly, about this because the importance of that testing is that if the asbestos fibers are less than 1%, I guess that's not a regulated abatement requirement within the state of Colorado. And, that material can then just be disposed of. But we're aware that there are buildings on the site, and you may know, you probably know a lot more of the history about it than I do, quite frankly, but this was built over time. And so some of these buildings, we believe, may not contain the same level of asbestos that others contain. So where we can save with some of those buildings, so they're literally by building and by phase testing material there to be able to zero in on exactly how much asbestos is in each building. The only reason I mention that is just because we're not going to unfortunately get the lab results until after we have to close next Friday. They're forthcoming. So what we've done with the seller and said, hey, we'll keep working on this. We'd like to escrow money at closing, and we think that's an acceptable proposal. We're waiting on final feedback, but there are permits required for both abatement and demolition, and that's the reason that initially there was a desire to close by the end of the year, but we had to extend that just to allow for a few months for permitting. But that would be the first thing that we do post-closing. I know we are required, and I will offer as much feedback as the board would like to have through our process. But I do think it's a site that on its own has tremendous potential. We haven't done much upfront marketing for a lot of reasons. I mean, number one is how we represent developments. Our focus has been on really, quite frankly, working with the URA and also working to control the abatement and demolition costs. But the plan is, literally post-close, so after next week, we'll be pursuing a variety of different options, and we will keep the board informed of that progress. I would respectfully ask for the board's approval today because of our required close date. We'll remain on, Debbie, to answer any other questions, but again, I appreciate the consideration by everyone.
Thanks so much, Rich. Appreciate your time today with us, and thanks for holding on while we take public comment and consider questions and comments from our own board. So at this point, I'm going to move to public comment. If you'd like to comment, if you could either come on video or raise your hand if you know how to do that in the Zoom, using the Zoom features, and we'll take comments now. Yes, Mayor Graham.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks to the URA board members for this opportunity to talk to you. I'll try to be brief. I've looked over the materials in the packet, and as a layman, I mean, there's some legal things that make me stop and go back a couple of times. But anyway, I'll try to address it from a layman's perspective. In looking at the summary sheet that's provided, I see the city's putting in what I shouldn't say the city, the URA is being asked to put in $2.15 million. And the Paragon people are putting in 1.1. So basically, URA is going to have 2/3 of the money into that project, and in return, what you're going to get is a first priority lien, and that's only good until construction starts, and that's going to get subordinated. Now, historically, I remember when the Barker House was being redone, the city was in first lien position for a $300,000 grant that was subordinated by the then city manager, and the city lost all that $300,000. That was a bitter history lesson at that time, and I think about it as I look at this. It seems to me like that the developer has done a lot to create a safety net for himself, for his organization, but that leaves the URA at risk. I don't think this is a responsible situation. Mr. Neville has explained that you can't realistically expect to be paid back the full amount, the $2.15 million. What else could you do with it? I mean, it looks like money is going to be, in my mind, wasted. I mean, we're not going to get, the URA are you really going to get full value out of this? $600,000 allocated for abatement. That's, we just heard, that seems unrealistically low. A low value is maybe 830,000. It could be 1.3 million. With this project start and they get stymied for lack of funding, would we end up not with just a blighted property, with a half demolished blighted property? There's some significant questions here. You're being asked to make a decision by next Friday for the convenience of the developer. In fact, in the document, it says they need a decision by August the 31st, and we just heard it's next Friday, August the 26th. So, our question, are you all being pressured into doing something quickly? I think there's a lot of questions that remain. If construction, let's say the thing we're finished in 4 years and it was generating taxes, you'd have, I think, about 5 years of collecting taxes. Are you going to get back $2.15 million? Could you spend that money more judiciously elsewhere? Earlier this year, there was an executive session with City Council, and Mr. Reese presented an earlier proposal. City Council's summary, basically, as we went around the table, was that this was a safety net planned for the protection of Paragon interests and not for the URA or for the community Manitou Springs. I'm at 3 minutes. Thanks for your time. I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Other comments? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to ask for comments and questions from the board members themselves. Yes, Alan.
Yeah, I have a number of questions. We've just had this very detailed packet, 3 very complex legal documents for a little over 48 hours. And so I've struggled to go through it. So I have some questions that may be trivial or obvious to someone who's been wading through this for 6 months, but I'd like to get some clarification on a few of these things. You know, this is a big deal. It's not utility box wraps or holiday lighting. This is a big thing, and I really want to understand it. And I think we all need to think of the ramifications. So I guess to start, you know, I look at this, you know, I just want to make sure what I'm reading is what everybody, what is really the fact. And the way I see it, it's, you know, technically a 2-year lien period, but that can be extended up to 6 years if I read the fine print correctly. Is that correct?
Jim?
David probably can explain it better than I can, but it's actually a 2-year period and then possibility of 3 extensions.
Yeah, I
That's
guess-
correct. I think just, Jim, just to piggyback on that, if you read it very closely, you'll see that it could probably be 6 if there's a sale and there's another year granted to an acquirer, right? So that's 6 would be the very far out extension period. But yes, it is up to 5 years, certainly.
Great, thank you. Now, there's in the agreement, the one that spells out all the terms and conditions. On page 5, paragraph B, I have a question just of, you know, there's a clause that just is hanging there that I've read it 50 times and it still makes no sense. And I'd like, you know, maybe just a typo that needs to be cleaned up, but it's fairly important since this is our contract. In paragraph B, the second to the last sentence, if you read that, you know, it's like lots of words. At the very end, there's a phrase, to be released and forgiven. I have no clue after reading this numerous times what is going to be released and forgiven in the context of that sentence. Can that be clarified, David?
Certainly. The only thing released there is the lien and not the loan. That's the intent of that paragraph. So released and forgiven, that would be the lien. But we were clear there that does not include the loan. So at that point, it would be unsecured, basically,
Okay.
an unsecured loan.
Okay, that was pretty vague or pretty obscure the way that is written. So then in I guess it's 4.1b, there's all the you know, the description of what happens if there's a sale and disposition to different parties. And I guess one question I have is, if this property is sold for, say, 5 million, just to pick a number out of the sky, you know, there's a significant profit there beyond all these initial investments. Where does that profit go? Does that all go to Paragon? I don't see that spelled out anywhere.
The URA would get paid back the loan, and that's it.
And so basically, then the developer would be able to flip and book $2 or $3 million on the backs of our 2.1 million.
Well, the URA would be fully repaid in that scenario.
Right. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Sorry, I got some of my questions were answered, but I want to get through all of these. Okay, during the, let's just say worst case, the lien period goes on for 6 years, which you established would be possible. If the economy were terrible or nobody came up that was perfect for the project. And, we still don't really, we have a concept of a concept plan, but we don't really know what's going to go on there. But it's sitting there, after next spring, it's scraped off. There's a 2-acre parcel there. There are a lot of interim uses that could happen there. Parking for the cog or the incline, food trucks, other mobile vending, special events. There's all kinds of stuff. So in that context, when I look at the other document, the deed of trust in page 9, section 24, it sounds like any rent proceeds would go to the developer during that period. That's 6 years that our 2.1 million is sitting there waiting for TIF, that a lot of income could be generated. And as I read that paragraph 24, it sounds to me like it would go to the developer and nothing would go towards the city's, relieving the city's debt.
And so I'd say that several interim uses have been discussed, including parking. And I would invite the Paragon team to jump in if they had anything to add here. But I don't think that we'll have a vacant lot here, right? Ideally, by the end of Q1 or April of next year, there'll be a vacant, fully rehabilitated, graded lot.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. What I'm trying to pin down is those interim uses, how the income from them, how it will be allocated. And as I read this, it's pretty specific. It seems pretty specific that it's been, the case has been made that all income will go to the developer.
Under this lien instrument, the rents are to the debtor unless there's a default, right? But if there's an interim use proposed, of course, the terms of that could be negotiated separately.
Okay,
Just one other thing I'd like to add, Alan, is that in an earlier discussion, and I think, we talked about this, was it maybe the city would be interested in using it for parking. And that still could happen. There didn't seem to be a lot of interest on the part of the city administrator on that in the beginning. But they would have been, I think, fairly favorable terms that the city could turn around and lease that property back out, for each individual user, whatever. But it looked like to me, when I ran some of the numbers, it looked like it could be fairly profitable to the city with minimal rent paid back to the developer.
okay. I may have some more questions. I definitely have more comments, but I'll just read this. I don't want to, if other questions, go ahead and you can come back to me.
Thanks, Alan. Other questions or comments? Farley, I see you.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to raise the little hand. I don't know how to do that. I just wanted to clarify if they were to rent to food trucks or some kind of anything that would generate sales tax, wouldn't that be collected in the same way that any other sales tax in the district is collected and then distributed? Like, I don't see why none of that wouldn't all go to the developer. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yes, Alan.
Okay, I'm looking again at paragraph 24, right up there at front. It says, debtor hereby assigns to lender the rents of the property. However, debtor shall, prior to acceleration or abandonment, have the right to collect and retain such rents as they become due and payable. So it sounds to me like all that income, and we're talking parking. If there was a 200-car parking lot there for 5 years, that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I just want to clarify that as this is written, that would go to the developer. And yeah, sure, if there's any sales tax or anything like that, that would go apply to the TIF. But we're not talking peanuts in terms of what the potential revenue is.
In your scenario you just described, a parking lease for 5 years, I would refer you to section 28 of this that says an agreement to grant a possessory interest in the property in excess of 1 year is considered a transfer that is prohibited. So if they wanted to do something like that, they have to come back to the URA for permission. At that point, that's when you negotiate for this allocation of rent. So if they enter into any long-term lease, they have to come to the URA for permission first under this instrument. Anything greater than a year.
What if they just decide they're going to go and ask for a conditional use from the city and they're going to manage it? There's no lease involved. It's their property. It's sitting there idle.
Well, that's within the city's control.
Well, the city's control for applying the rules in the zoning code for a conditional use. But as far as, what recourse does a URA have to say, oh, hey, if you're going to go into enterprise generating a couple $100,000 a year in rent, parking revenue, we want to share that. I don't see where we have any say in that, the way this is written.
Well, I would invite the Paragon team to speak to what is the likelihood of that possibility. And secondly, I mean, we have city folks on this meeting, and your staff is in direct communication with the city. And this is not something I think that would happen without coordination. And the city would certainly have an interest in making sure that the revenue goes in a fair manner.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Rich.
I didn't know if you wanted me to maybe chime in a little bit. I think David somewhat invited me, but I'll address some of the questions that Alan's asking. But specifically, we are aware that the city had an interest for parking. We remain very open to that as an interim use. We didn't get so far as to know what that rent structure would look like, how much it would be. So I think to David's point, I mean, all that would be up for negotiation, but I can't imagine, honestly, that the financial return for such a rent structure is going to be of interest to us to keep it that way. We're making this investment for the potential and realization of a full-scale development. I have no interest to put this kind of money in, and I know it may be less than what the URA is considering, but it's a sizable amount of money. And I think any reasonable developer would expect a reasonable return on that. And quite frankly, any sort of interim use, I think, can't justify that kind of return. So I guess, Alan, we have every economic incentive to do exactly what I think the URA would like to see done.
Alan, do you have any other comments or questions at this time? Okay, I'm gonna move on then. Other comments or questions by our board members? Hearing none, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve this development agreement, and then we can consider a vote.
So
Yes,
moved.
Ann.
I'd make that motion.
I'll
Uh,
second.
Move approval, and Barbara, Winter, or John, you two pick. Who'd like to second?
Barb's good.
Barb's good. Motion by Ann, second by Barb to approve this development agreement. Any further comment or discussion? Yeah, John?
Yeah, I'd like to make several comments about this. First of all, I find that this action is consistent with the Urban Renewal Authority plan and really responds to the reasons that council adopted the plan and set the urban renewal plan as its policy for the east end of town. Second of all, I think it's extremely important that this agreement provides for the removal of the most blighted property in the city and puts it in a position where it can be marketable, regardless of whether Paragon proceeds or not. Thirdly, the agreement, and this was one of the things that I had asked to be placed in the agreement, and Paragon has agreed to this, is that the Urban Renewal Authority Board will have early input into design and uses, as opposed to the normal city process where development financing is already in place and an application to the city is really not very flexible. So we have, through this agreement, upfront input into the redevelopment of this particular property, and I think that's very valuable. By removing the blight, I'll back up and say the biggest issue for most developers is the risk of the unknown. And by removing the blight, it removes a substantial risk and unknown on this particular property. Some of you may know I was a receiver for an asbestos remediation property some years ago. I know it's very complicated, and it's certainly a detriment to redevelopment, and this removes that unknown and risk. Lastly, Manitou, in my opinion, has always had B and C quality developers who have had trouble performing and have, quite frankly, often not done a good job. I think we have an A developer here, and I'm pleased to have Paragon as a partner. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Other comments or questions? Yes, Alan, and then Mark.
Well, why don't let Mark go first? I'd like to hear from him.
Okay, Mark.
Oh, thank you very much. This has been a very, I think, good discussion we're having. I'm glad to have the mayor and some other citizens on board. You know, I was a initial skeptic of this proposal, and I appreciate all the work that David and Jim have put into getting this deal right, Ann and Debbie also. I had a lot of concerns about the back end of this, what we were exposing ourselves to, and all of those have been answered to my satisfaction. I think this is a solid deal, and I think we need to really think about what is the mission of the URA. And I think it was Mayor Graham who mentioned that this could possibly be parking for the COG and other activities. Our mission is to foster and encourage revitalization, redevelopment in the blighted area, the 50 acres of the URA. So while those side concerns and potential interim uses of the property are certainly worthy of discussion, they don't really comport with our overall mission. Our mission is to revitalize this area that was designated as a blighted area back in 2006 when we formed the URA. So I think we sometimes confuse the city's interests with the URA's interests. And one reason I supported ultimately the creation of the URA is because in all my time in Manitou, the east end of town has never received anywhere really anything as far as support and redevelopment. That was until the WAP project came along and created some revitalization there. But I watched year over year as we issued bonds and passed ballot measures and took grants that went into downtown redevelopment. So I want to keep the focus on how this benefits that 50 acres. Ultimately, of course, the benefit to the city needs to be considered also, because when the URA goes away, the city becomes the beneficiary and the tax collecting entity entirely for this area. So when I look at this project strictly through a URA lens as a URA board member, I have been satisfied that this is a good deal for the URA. Our mission is not to get a rate of return on the tax incremental financing that we collect. Our mission is to invest that money strategically into what, as I mentioned before, redevelopment, revitalization of the URA. So I had concerns. I was a skeptic all along. I read through the documents. I've had discussions with some of my fellow board members one-on-one, drilling down and asking the tough questions. And I'm satisfied that this has gotten to a place where I'm ready to move forward with it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Alan?
Yes, I just, I've spent a lot of time looking at this, and I understand the mission of the URA, and I think there are a lot of different ways to address the blight on that property. And I think this proposal just turns everything upside down. The framework we embraced when we formed the URA is that a developer gets reimbursed with incremental tax revenue, not that the URA gets reimbursed. And, we can debate all day about the pros and cons of front loading or back loading. I think what we're doing here is, it's disingenuous to call it a loan. This is not a loan. It's a grant to the developer. You look at we haven't seen any spreadsheets projecting what kind of revenue would be generated. It seems a stretch to think that anything's going to be on that property in less than 4 years. I just don't believe it. And, you can use the experience of the Holiday Inn. Number one, they follow the process. They're backloading their TIF reimbursement, and their project, they had a plan, they had a concept, they had an approved plan by city council in fall of 2018, and they're just now opening up 4 years from that point. And so just imagining, even if we get it at that point, we're it's beyond imagination that we'll get much of that TIF back or get much of that tax payment. I think we have to, the fact that this is structured with the possibility of 4 extensions doesn't give me a big, strong sense of confidence that something's going to happen. A lot of things happen. We never know what's going to happen with the economy. You look at 2008 to 2010, everything came to a screeching halt. And so we could find just, almost a negative over the duration of this. And I think it's important to also, consider that this is not the only proposal on the table. That's what disturbs me. I think the mayor has made a fairly strong case for an alternative to this, and we haven't talked about it because we're being rushed to a decision based on someone sheltering their profit from another venture on our backs. And I just, I don't see that as good policy to be rushed and pushed. And I understand there's a lot of work to come up with a proposal and a project, but I just think this is crazy. And finally, I agree that it'd be awesome to get rid of the La Fund, to get that site mitigated. I'd be supportive of front funding anybody to the tune of 600 or 800K to mitigate the property, but limiting it, just to this developer, I think is crazy. There's other possibilities. And I think, the fact that the city has a viable option, it's tragic that we're ignoring it and rushing right beyond it without considering it. I think it's almost malpractice that we're not giving more consideration to that.
Thank you, Alan. Anne?
Yeah, and I'd like to just correct a few things. Alan has indicated he thinks are common practice. Common practice in URAs is definitely to upfront the subsidy to the developer. Typically, that's done by borrowing the money and then getting paid back over time from the TIF revenue. We have the luxury of having the money on hand, so we don't have to incur the expense or the risk of borrowing money. So it is absolutely the role that most URAs upfront the money. I would also indicate that I hardly think we are being rushed into a decision. We have been working on this for well over a year. We have, as both Debbie and Mark, I think, has clearly indicated, we understand the obligation and the responsibility the Urban Renewal Plan gives to this board. And that is to foster through financial assistance to the developer, the revitalization and redevelopment of the URA area. And I think that is exactly what we're doing. I would also indicate that I believe that taking a property off the rolls and foregoing property tax by having the city buy the property for a parking lot, which would generate revenue only into the enterprise and not provide tax revenue for the city going forward, would not be a prudent direction. As we well know, one of the reasons I think this has all come up is because of the city's concern about what may occur if the marijuana tax election is favorable in Colorado Springs and we lose a substantial amount of revenue for that, and the need for the city to start diversifying their revenue base away from just marijuana. And that's exactly what this project provides. So I think it is absolutely the appropriate thing to do. And as Mark said, absolutely consistent with the charge we are given by the Urban Renewal Plan. Thank you.
Yes, Alan.
Yeah, I just like to make a couple of comments. Number one, I think the city's proposal did speak to carving out the front strip for commercial, grab and go shop, coffee shop, who knows what. There are lots of opportunities. And the fact, yes, it's true there would be, the park, if the city owned it, at least owned part of it, and it was a parking enterprise, that would generate the parking revenue, but it would also bring a lot of bodies to that area of town. And those bodies would have money and they would buy stuff. They would be a catalyst to stimulate other development. So indirectly, but just as importantly, they would have the potential of generating tax revenue.
Thank you. Other members of the board? Who haven't we heard from? John?
I'll just make one comment about the use of this property as a parking lot with some commercial on the front. We had a study done jointly funded by both the city and the URA, which basically showed that depending on the use, of course, there are very few parking spaces that would be available for an enterprise if we had a viable commercial use on the front portion of the property. So I think what that study showed was that use of this property as both a parking lot and a commercial property is really unrealistic, that this should be a commercial property in its entirety. And if there's a half dozen or a dozen spaces left over, so be it.
Mayor Graham, our time for public comment has ended. But considering the fact that Alan has raised this issue of using the property for city parking, I'm going to allow you to speak at this point and make your comment.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that's very generous of you, and I appreciate that. Yes, to elaborate a little bit on Alan's comments, during an executive session earlier this year, City Council did discuss the idea of the possibility of acquiring that property and of using it for parking. Deputy City Administrator Roy Cheney had done some back of the envelope checks, and it did look like it was financially feasible and enough certainly to consider. The thought, I think, that the council actually seemed to be pretty favorable about it. During an executive session, we don't make any formal decisions, but we gravitated towards the idea of not using it entirely for parking, but of putting it was desirable to have a commercial property out near the front to sort of screen the parking lot in the back. Based on that discussion, Denise Howell and I met with Mayor John Sars of Colorado Springs and discussed the possibility of requiring incliners to use that lot. We met with Gary Pierce from the Cog Railway and talked about the feasibility of them using that to locate their cog riders at that spot, thereby reducing the congestion in downtown Manitou. I mean, in many respects, this seemed to be a very favorable idea. Council looked at it favorably. Again, we didn't go into details or make discussions. We don't do that in executive session. City of Colorado Springs and the Cog Railway looked at this as a means of helping us solve our congestion problems. Certainly the Cog Railway saw that as a viable option, I think. So that is something I think that the city would be interested in continuing to discuss. I would remind you that this coming Tuesday night, we'll have a joint session, a public session, and that could be something that we would discuss. I think there's some opportunities there. If you did decide to move on this motion after that meeting, you would have until Friday. So I think you've got a little bit of time to think this through and to have some discussion. So I appreciate your allowing me to speak. Thank you.
Other comments? Yes, Marcy.
Thank you. A couple of comments. One is that I was going to suggest what the mayor just did suggest, which was to wait until after the meeting on Tuesday and listen to the comments from the council. Frankly, I feel somewhat like Alan that there has been, I know we have been talking about this property for a long, long time. And for those of you, I go back to the early days along with Representative Snyder. We were one of the first folks, and I think we also had, who else here? Farley was on it. And so we go way back, and the property was always in jeopardy, you might say. There was always something going on with that property. And so I am anxious to see it. I am anxious to see it to see a new creation on that property, whether it is a commercial, whether it is a multifamily. I think it just has so many opportunities for us, and I hate to see us miss that opportunity. And I say that to our present mayor, because we've talked about it so long, John. My other thought, though, is that when you make a decision like this, and it's going to affect us for a number of years, I'm a little skeptical about going ahead with it. So immediate, you may not agree with me, but that's how I see it. And I would just suggest the alternative of waiting and having a special meeting, or we could do it on the phone, or however you want to do it, Madam Chairman. But I would like to have that meeting with the city council first, and then make up my mind so that I feel perfectly comfortable with whatever we decide. The developer will come and go, will either be successful and make the profit that he's hoping to make, and or he may not. But we who live here will have a long time to think about the decision that we made. So my comment would be to wait until after Tuesday night.
Thank you, Marcy. Other comments from board members? Yeah, Mark.
Thank you. In light of Marcy's comments, I was hoping to get John or David or Jim or somebody to talk about the timeline, because we do know we have that hard deadline of August 26th. If we were to wait for the Tuesday joint meeting with the city and the URA, would that still be enough time to execute this agreement if the board then had emergency or special meeting, say Wednesday, the day after?
I guess I'll jump in. My own experience with real estate deals and things like this, I mean, for a closing on Friday, the things ought to be coming together earlier in the week, and the funds have to be ready to be moved. So it does take a couple of days for those things to come together. Would it be better to maybe, since you'll be at a meeting on Tuesday evening, to take this up at that point versus Wednesday morning, for example? Well, I guess I'd refer to the Paragon team, who's more intimately involved in the actual real estate aspects of the closing and the movement of the funds, to tell us whether that gives them enough time.
Well, would you like me to address that question?
Yes, please, Rich.
Chairman? Okay, thank you. I share the concern over timing, and invariably there is a lot to be done. And, you know, honestly, I appreciate the board's being in a position, if it should elect to move forward, to act. But I can just imagine from our own side, we have a lot of work that we're doing. And quite frankly, we're just trying to put the nails in where we can now and move forward. But there's a lot to be done, and I would worry, and again, I would request a decision today, but obviously it's up to you all as a board.
Thank you. Farley, you had your hand raised, and then Barbara.
I'll just pass for right now. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I had another thought, but I'll pass.
Barb?
I just had a question of Rich. Are you still in a position that you're not quite together on the deal with the LaFun family or people?
Not in position. I'd say not yet finalized, but we believe we've got a way to move forward. Yes.
And I'm familiar with your kind of exchanges. You're absolutely hard pressed at your final drop dead date.
Yes, ma'am.
26.
Yeah.
I would just further comment, I concur with the commentary earlier by Ann and Mark and certainly John, that this type of a project is exactly what we're bound to bring forward to our community. And I think for all the right reasons. And so I feel pretty strongly that this has been discussed very earnestly. I've worked on a number of real estate deals on behalf of Ent when I've worked with them. Things aren't easy, and I know, and I'm not speaking for the developers, but a lot of effort, time, and investment goes into just trying to bring a deal to the table. We've been working toward exactly that point for quite some months of bringing the right kind of deal to the table. And I appreciate that Rich and his son had the wherewithal. Is it John there? Hi, John. Had the wherewithal to kind of stick with our community to try to see something accomplished. I just came back from a trip from the Raleigh-Durham area. I've been to a number of other communities in looking at cities and infrastructure, just of my own interest around the country. And it takes deals like this to resurrect properties. And it's just, there's no way about it. I think what John spoke to, I mean, you can get one-off developers to bring you a deal and say that they're going to do X, Y, and Z, but it really takes vision and somebody who's been in the business for any length of time to really bring that creation to the table. We've certainly seen it with our sister city, our big sister city next door, and it takes that kind of wherewithal to make improvements in our community. And again, I think what Anne and Mark spoke to very specifically, that's the kind of deals that we're charged, or the kind of projects that we're charged and improvements we're charged with bringing to our community through the URA.
Thanks, Barb. Any other comments from board members or questions for the team? Yes, Mark.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate this. I think Anne mentioned this. We're a unique URA, okay? Have cash on hand. And what that does, you know, the city is ultimately liable if a URA, if the TIF financing doesn't cover a bond cost or a borrowing cost. Ultimately, that goes to the city. That's not the case here. I don't see a way for the city to be on the hook if anything were to go south with this project. So I think that's one should give some reassurance to the mayor and the council and the community that we're not seeing their ability here. That's not the case here. And from a larger picture, you know, as we all know, there are a couple of us here who are past mayors of Manitou Springs. And one of my great regrets during my time as mayor was the fact that I could not get a public-private partnership together to redevelop the Tajin Alami or to do something up on Higginbotham Flats. And we tried. I mean, we had that Tajin Alami, we rented that parking lot. We had a rolling option for 3 years. So we paid that rent. I've met with at least a dozen groups trying to get somebody to take over that, because when properties go, what I've learned is when properties go into public ownership, they never come out. They are never right for private redevelopment, for expanding our tax base, any of the things that we really have struggled with over the years. And so I worry that this the public ownership, that'll be the end of it. It will be used for a public benefit like parking or something else. But our needs are to have an expanded and diversified tax base, especially in light of the ballot question that's coming up in November in neighboring Colorado Springs. So I think this is a good investment to reach that overriding goal, which I've held for a long time, that we need to do to diversify and to expand our tax base. It's been a struggle. And as I said, you know, I've learned through trial and error, or whatever you want to call it, that once a property goes into public ownership, it never comes out. And so I think here's an opportunity to live up to that promise of fostering, partnering with a private entity to get that redevelopment and meet all of the overarching goals that I think the city should never lose as their primary motivator in this space. You know, you look at RAs, the north end of Nevada, I don't think our citizenry and voters would stand for a Costco or a big box store or a major development, with multiple entities inside of it, like they have on North Nevada. We are a unique situation. We have a small URA, 50 acres or so. This is really the kind of targeted approach that I think is the best way forward for our URA and frankly for the city overall. So I remain supportive of this proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Any other comments?
Thank you, Debbie. My only comment is that I'm not against the proposal. I was looking at, frankly, from a much broader perspective, is trying to bring our city council and the folks that they represent to understand where we are, because to be very honest with you, many people in this community really do not understand the purposes of the URA. And I take that as maybe part of my responsibility as a long-term member and some other folks. It's unfortunate that they don't have a perspective about what the URA does or should be doing. And it hasn't been our fault. We just haven't had the opportunities in many cases. So it's not that I'm against the project. I want to say that to the board very clearly. I was just trying to find a way to offer the mayor here and the council some opportunity to have some dialogue with them about why. In fact, I wish the whole council was at this meeting, because then perhaps there would be a better understanding of why this board is taking the position that it is. And we have not done that. That was my point.
Thank you, Marcy. I'm not seeing that anyone else cares to comment from our board, so I'd like to make a few closing remarks. And Marcy, I'm going to start with your last remark. It is certainly the case that through our liaison, Nancy Fortune, in our own workshop with the city council, in Jim Reese's outreach, and many of us as individual board members, our outreach to city council members, that we have talked to them privately, publicly, together, separately, for many months and years about exactly what we do and why we do it. I think the difference today is that this development represents the largest single piece of property within our 50-acre tiny URA, as Mark Snyder describes it, and therefore it is a big deal. And to me, it's a big deal for several reasons. First of all, it is not only the largest property, but frankly, the largest blighted property probably in the entire city of Manitou Springs. It is a public safety hazard. It is a public health hazard because of the asbestos. We've already had one fire on the property. I dread to think what would happen should we have another. It is our job to eliminate blight in the URA. Working with a developer with the heft that Paragon brings to the table, with their proven track record of doing redevelopments like this one in other parts of the country, it is very important to me, partnering with such a developer and having a commitment to eliminate the blight as quickly as they possibly can. It brings me comfort, not just for the ability to redevelop, but also for our community, that it will be safer faster by doing this deal. Another thing that I want to reiterate is that while it is our job to promote redevelopment, it is also our job to be the economic development engine for the city of Manitou. It's one of our jobs. It's sort of inherent in the work that we do. And you know, the city's interests and our interests are sometimes divergent, but in one respect, they're very much the same, and that is that we are the quickest way to expand the tax base, diversify the tax base for the city. And that's an important objective of this project. So even if we don't regain the TIF money that we would spend by approving this agreement, the entire city benefits in the long run because the tax base is expanded with a commercial development along the avenue. And a good commercial development is tough to come by. Barb Winters described that. So did John Maynard. It's not easy to do these deals. And Mark Snyder, as a past mayor of Manitou, knows it's not easy to do these deals. We've worked diligently on this deal ever since we knew that the LaFun was in fact in not only financial trouble, but in trouble to lose its business license because they couldn't operate a legitimate business on the property. So it is my belief, firm belief, that we need to act today. We have absolutely run all the due diligence possible on a joint public-private arrangement that would provide parking on this site. And we all came to the agreement after looking at the NES proposal for a joint commercial parking project, that without acquiring land around the LaFun property, it was not a viable development. It could not be viable. And we all know that the properties surrounding the LaFun are difficult to acquire. Everyone's tried for years, since November of 2006, to talk to all the properties along the avenue. It is very rare that a property like this even comes up to be acquired and for a project like this to move forward. So I believe it's urgent that we act now on this matter. And with that, I'm going to close the comment and call for a vote. So all those in favor of approving this development agreement, please raise your hand or indicate by saying aye.
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 I see John, Debbie, Ann, Alan, Barb, Farley, Mark. All those voting no, please raise your hand. Marcy and Alan. With that, the motion to approve this development agreement it passes. Thank you all so very much for your time and your energy. Rich, you and the Paragon team, we are proud to be partners with you in redeveloping this property. Jim, Reese, David Neville, thank you so much for all your hard work. I know I've got some documents to sign, so please get in touch with me right away to do that so that we can make this go. Thanks to those of you who made comments today, and most importantly, thanks to my fellow board members. This is not an easy thing to bring together, and your thoughtful approach, the conversations that we've had in private, and then this discussion today makes me proud to be part of this organization. So thanks very much. Rich, I'll let you folks, you want to say anything before you leave, and then we'll be back in touch to get everything done.
Yeah, just a word of thanks to the board for your support. We look forward to continue working with you. We will sign off after this and look forward to just finalizing details with the URA. Thanks again.
Terrific. Terrific. Thank you. Okay, let's get back to our agenda order. Is there any public comment on anything else that we have left on our agenda? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to ask for approval of the July 15th minutes, please.
I'll move to approve the minutes that I read this morning.
Thanks, Mark.
And I'll second it. And I read it the other night.
Thanks, Marcy. Any comments or concerns about the minutes? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, motion to approve carries. And the July financial reports.
Yes, and actually it's June, Debbie, I think.
Oh, yeah,
But
sorry.
we'll start with the balance sheet. We have 2.84 million, which is, I think, pretty much what we had the last month. If we move to, and I would point out, I guess, well, let's move to page 3, and it shows the revenue we've collected to date. It shows 33,794 for the sales tax from Manitou. And I did just deposit a check for the sales tax revenue for February, March, and April of $364,000. So when we see August, we will see that amount go up. The expenses, I think you can see there, we have still been paying OTAC for some work they're doing on the Lomer, I think on the Becker's Lane Bridge that seems to be continuing. Jim may comment, but they've asked for an additional amount to finish that work, but hopefully that will be done soon. Other than that, I think the expenses are just routine. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I have a question. Do we usually move to approve the financials?
We do.
Then I move to approve the June financials.
And a second?
Barb,
Barb. Any other questions? Okay, all those in favor of approving the financial report, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay. Old business, bridge.
Yes, good morning. So I'm going to drop in the results of our public art survey, which have the input from our residents and our business owners, and by way of explaining the bridge. So I've dropped in that link, and basically what I'll do is mention that pages, I'm thinking 2 and 5 are the most relevant to the URA, specifically showing why we made the selections we did. And so I'm looking at, I said 2 and 5, page 3 for the Becker's Lane Bridge poll. And what you'll notice is that of the 2 designs, the community and our jurors had a strong preference for option 2. There are considerably more tiles invested. And so in speaking with Javier and his situation with his studio, what we're looking at is a 4-month fabrication time. So the update is he has received his first deposit and he will be ordering materials and beginning fabrication. Unfortunately, once that is finished, it will be too cold for us to install those in a permanent and lasting fashion. And as you know, we see this as more of a construction project that has an artistic flair. And so we want to make sure that when those tiles are adhered, they cure fully. And so we'll be looking at a late spring to early June application of the finalized tiles. Yes, it will take longer, but we feel strongly that both the jurors and the public were in absolute harmony about their preference here. So it's worth the investment, but that design will definitely enhance the bridge.
Thank you, Becca. Comments, questions for Becca?
Becca, Barb, what was so different about, I know the designs were different, but what was so different about the tile configuration to cause more work?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, so the difference is one is a more traditional type of Spanish influence tile. So the tiles are hand painted and fired and glazed and can be installed fairly quickly. The difference with what the community strongly had a preference for, so I'm looking at the chart, it was 62%. Really, there was a strong preference. And so those glass mosaics have to be hand cut and assembled on tiles, and then those tiles have to be added to the bridge. So there are more steps. What you get is a more intricate design though, with more facets that reflect the light very gently. And so because that was a strong preference of the community, the artist, his process is to listen to the community and have a conversation with them. And he felt that working through us on that poll was the best way to honor his way of working.
Is it using both kinds of materials? From the other designs, the hand painted mosaics plus the glass tiles?
Unfortunately, no. So he won't be hand painting it, which is why it takes longer, because he'll have to hand cut these pieces of glass.
Well, as long as he has some urgency about our project to bring it to completion.
Yeah, the way we've structured the contract with the artist is that they only receive 25% of the project fees at the outset. That helps them acquire the materials. And from there, they have to produce their milestones to demonstrate fully that those fabrications are happening to achieve the rest of their payments.
So what's your next milestone of accomplishment for the artist?
A fully rendered design, samples of what those look like, and that achieves the full 50%, and they don't get the rest of the 50% until the site installation is complete.
When do you expect that?
I think the most likely scenario is late spring to early summer of 2023, because what we have to achieve are 2 to 3 days of overnight temperatures of at least 50 degrees. And when I was looking at the Manitou Springs averages, we're looking at late May to early June.
No, I was asking, when do you think the next phase of samples being?
Oh, sure. So again, his timeline is, he has rendered the design. He shared that with our community. So the design is complete. But at this point, we're looking for that demonstrated ability to fabricate. So I would anticipate that he'll have to wait on the ordering, and supply chain issues are real. So in all fairness, we're looking at October, November for that next payment.
Okay, so you should see a product sample by fall. Okay,
Correct.
that's good. Since we all seem to be concerned about timelines and how money is expended, so
Sure.
big and small, we want to see some production here. Thank you, Becca.
Of course.
I appreciate the comment, the question, Barb.
Any other questions for Becca? All right, thanks for the update. Jim, an update on the Highway 24 interchange status.
Yeah, the ongoing saga with CDOT. They did have comments. They wanted more information. As of yesterday, Matrix produced all that information and forwarded it to Dole. So I think Dole will be reviewing that with CDOT. Then the new information that they provided basically reaffirms that the free right turn off the highway can be eliminated. There is some discussion whether or not you have a signalized right turn, right on red versus no right on red. And frankly, I'm not sure where that's going exactly. Their numbers said you didn't even need to do the right on red. It would be safer for pedestrians and cyclists if you didn't have the right on red. So anyhow, stay tuned. We'll see what CDOT comes back with, and I'm sorry this is taking long.
That's the way with CDOT. Yes, Mark.
Thank you, Debbie. As some of you know, I'm actually in Santa Fe, New Mexico, dealing with a family health medical crisis. And I got to check out of my hotel and get headed back home. So I'm going to ask for permission to get off the call now. I really appreciate you all. And as I've talked to someone one-on-one, we have been dealing with something down here, but things are looking to the positive now. But I really appreciate it. And with that, I will bid my farewell to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Safe travels.
Thank you.
other comments or questions for Jim about the Highway 24 project?
Is there any contacts that will help anything to move things along for you?
I'm afraid not. I think we just have to slog through it, Barb. You know, and I mean, it wasn't that they were totally negative when we met with them before. It was that they just decided they wanted a little bit different methodology used. And so I think Matrix has addressed that. Hopefully, we can move along now and actually do some design work.
Yeah, they were concerned about volume counts, weren't they?
They were concerned that there would be too much of a stacking onto the off ramp.
Right.
And apparently, again, you know, that doesn't appear to be the case with either of the options. And I think we could probably live with either one, frankly.
Yeah, what should be addressed is how they create traffic stacking with this metered ramp access to the interstate.
Nobody pays attention to those, Mark.
Yeah, you create metered entry without a long run of entry, and it makes no sense whatsoever. So they've totally defeated our Fillmore Highway interchange. They're all together. That's totally a CDOT issue.
Another matter for another day. Okay, we'll wait for an update. Fountain Creek Bridge easement, Jim.
A couple of things on that. One is that the TRS has got the easements together. They did the valuation on them, and that's been sent to Debbie, who signed them. So they will be making offers ASAP to both property owners. The easements, as you may recall, half is on the Park Row Lodge property and half is on the Martins property. Now the Martins property just got a little bit more complicated, unfortunately, with Bobby Martin's passing. Apparently there's two parcels. One is the parcel that they lived in on the south side of the creek. And that one was apparently held in joint tenancy, so it's not a problem. But the open space piece that's on the other side of the creek, apparently he owned that himself only, which means, according to TRS, that is subject to probate. Apparently has a will, so I don't think it's going to be that big a deal, but it can take like 6 weeks to go through. So slow down. In the meantime, knowing that I think we're going to be able to get these easements, and it looked like some positive feedback, I went ahead and discussed getting a proposal for the actual design of the bridge from Matrix. And they are working on that right now. They've been working with getting some more information, floodplain information, because we will be in the floodplain, and also exactly where that storm sewer is located from the county when they built the WAP project. So anyhow, they're gathering some information. I think I'll have a proposal at least by the next board meeting for design engineering and hopefully to purchase the bridge. But of course, we need to know how long the bridge is going to be. And I'm assuming we will do a prefab bridge, just like you see all over the trail systems already. So I think we're making some progress, but it's going a little bit slower than I'd like. So hopefully next month I have more information to give you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Jim?
Jim, didn't you identify seeing a bridge sitting somewhere that was not being used?
Oh, yeah, there was the one, I think Farley pointed it out. There was one in Garden of the Gods. And I have seen that bridge. I don't know that it'd be long enough, though. It's a pretty long span we're going to be looking at. But, hey, I don't mind talking to Park and Rec and Colorado Springs and see if they would mind parting with that.
I think we should investigate that, see if it's functional at all for our use.
Okay, I don't mind.
Shit, it's been sitting there for 3 years.
I'm suggesting it anyway to the group.
Yeah, my dog likes to walk across it, Farley.
I I'm impressed with your memory of this, Barb. Very impressed.
Well, we don't want to lose sight of some of these hidden opportunities if there are any.
That's right.
Sometimes you get things for free.
Good point. Jim, Executive Director report, although I have a feeling we know what you've been up to.
Yeah, I think I just went through most of it. Most of it, of course, was working with David and Paragon to try to get that agreement together. So that's taken most of my time. Again, the Fountain Creek Bridge easement, finally getting that to moving. Highway 24, and as usual, I meet with the city administrator every other month, and this was the month. So I meet with Denise and keep her up to speed on a lot of our projects. That's about it.
Terrific. Yeah, Barb.
We were postponing rebidding the park bathrooms. So we need to plan ahead for rebidding that. I think we voted to postpone it to fall. So fall's approaching, not too far away. So we don't lose sight that we're planning to do that and maybe get some other interested parties in advance.
Yeah, I can circle back with Skylar and see where the city is as far as getting that ready to be rebid. I'll do that.
Okay.
Thank you. And I think I was on the correspondence back and forth between you and Skylar after we made that decision, Jim, and he seemed prepared to proceed in the next month or two to rebid. So he certainly is aware that that's the intent. That's our intent. City Council liaison report without Nancy, that's a difficult thing to do. She is looking forward to our joint meeting next week. I spoke with her briefly when I learned that she wasn't going to be here today, and she just really appreciates all of your work and is eager to sit down in that joint session and have a good talk with the city council. So that's what I can tell you from Nancy, give you as part of her report. And we'll look for a full report from her at our next meeting. Other
By the
business.
way,
Yes.
I will be sending out the agenda later today for that meeting. It's kind of awkward in a way because council will have their own agenda and they will post it, and we will have our own agenda, which will be exactly the same as council's, but I have to basically post it. So
Yes.
you'll see that later today.
Barb, you had a question, and then I was going to put that agenda up so that we can all look at it before we adjourn. Yes, Barb.
I just want to add for the record that I appreciate Nancy's comments on our behalf at that last work session in speaking, much as some of you have today, of the value of the URA, its purpose, and that there needs to be cogent and thoughtful consideration of their discussion that they're putting forth for the meeting.
Thank you.
And I wanted to ask, somebody's on our call that says Joy's iPad. Who is that on my screen? Do y'all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Who is that? Hello, Joy. Is that
The
just some?
assumption is it's a member of the public, and they don't have to
Okay.
tell us who they are. So I'm just proceeding.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to move to other business now, and I would like to share this agenda with you that Jim prepared based on the based on input from Denise and the mayor for our joint meeting next week. So we have been going back and forth with the city. Initially, we were going to have an executive session today to meet with the consultant that the city has hired to consider what would happen to sales tax revenue within Manitou if the Colorado Springs recreational marijuana measure passes in November, because apparently the results are devastating. And that's one of the reasons why the council had this work session to discuss the URA a couple of weeks ago, because following that presentation, the council really understands the urgency to find additional sources of revenue. And our fund balance is a source of revenue for the city should they choose to disband us. So that issue, we thought we were going into executive session today to hear about that, but the consultant wasn't available today. Then we thought we were going into executive session with the council next Tuesday to hear that presentation, but apparently that is not happening either. So instead, we're having a public meeting, and we've been asked to send materials to the city describing our activities, our obligations, so that they understand our financial situation, can talk to us about their financial situation, and we can have a joint discussion. So I want to make sure that all of you are comfortable with what is going to take place next week. As Jim said, because it's a joint session, the council will open their meeting and we'll open our meeting, and we will be meeting as deliberative bodies with full authority to act in this joint session together. So I just wanted you to see the agenda, which is pretty short and sweet. Involves a presentation by us, a presentation by Mayor Graham, and this new business item called Consideration of Urban Renewal Authority's Future. Given what we heard at the work session a couple of weeks ago, frankly, I can't tell you what that means. All I can tell you is that we will be there with a quorum and able to speak as individual board members, but likely with, unless you want to reach some agreement today about what position we might or might not take, I'm not in a position to understand what it is that will be asked next Tuesday. So my thinking is we go in and listen and hear what they have to say and ask to adjourn the meeting and consider their remarks and afterwards at a meeting of our own. That's sort of where I'm at. So with that, I'm going to open it for discussion from all of you. And I'll stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other again. Yeah, Farley.
How does this work? So we're both going to be in a regular or a special meeting. Who's
Yes.
leading the mayor's going to lead the discussion? And then okay.
Yes, but we have to call it as a regular, as a special meeting of our own, because we'll have a quorum of members present, right? So otherwise we'd be operating outside the sunshine law. So we have to call it as a meeting of our body, even though I have no intention that we are taking any action as a body, right?
Okay.
Because this is the city's agenda. So it appears that they could maybe not take action, but at least deliberate as a body. But I do not expect that we will do that unless you all tell me that we should or could, or that you would prefer to do that. I don't know what we do.
So our meeting is just a formality so that we're not in violation of sunshine laws, but it's really their meeting.
Yes,
Right.
That's my belief.
Yep.
Other comments, questions, concerns? Yeah, John.
Are we permitted to speak?
At the meeting?
Yes.
I believe so.
And I just foresee a procedural issue here with what, 16 people trying to have the floor and figure out who's going to speak at what item and what have you. And it just seems convoluted to me. I mean, I think I'll have comments, but I'm not sure how I'll get to make them.
Good point. And we can certainly ask for clarification either before the meeting, today, next week, before the meeting, and get some clarification and send it out to all of you so that you understand what the operating rules are going to be. Usually in these cases, the mayor does conduct the meeting and calls on people to make comments. That's my only experience. Yeah, Alan, and then Farley.
Yeah, I'll just comment from what John asked. We've had numerous joint planning commission city council meetings. And as you said, the mayor chairs, the mayor calls on people, and pretty much everybody's entitled to speak. And it's just a matter of bandwidth. It looks like we have an hour and a half or 2 hours. And so we'll go around and talk. And I've always found the mayor to be very deferential to the other board to make sure that people get to speak. So I don't think there's any question there that anybody will be able to talk.
So is this a work session type format or a formal meeting type format?
It is being presented as a formal meeting, not as a work session.
Well, in that case, then you can, to answer John's question, then you'll be able to speak, John.
Okay, I'm just curious if let's say one of the board members made a proposal in terms of how to share marijuana sales tax revenue. That would, to me, drive a pretty lengthy discussion, potentially, not only amongst council, but amongst our board. And I'm trying to foresee how that might happen in this format.
My answer to that is that would be referred to another meeting, probably to another work session. I mean, I don't even know they know how this is going to work. So all I can say is if it's a public meeting, then I believe that everybody will have a chance to say something if they so choose.
Yep.
Farley.
I would like some clarification, even if you, just some kind of framework about how he intends on managing this meeting.
Okay.
Sounds reasonable.
Between Jim and I, we will follow up after this, after we're done today. Jim needs to post our version of this agenda. And so he'll have to ask the city to do that. And we can also request some clarification about kind of the rules of the road so that we understand that this is this a dialogue? Will we get an opportunity to speak as individuals? And just a clarification that from our standpoint, we won't be taking any action as a board at this meeting. We're there to listen and to ask good questions and gain some fuller understanding of what's going on. I think the thing that's going to make it difficult for us is that we don't have the benefit of this presentation about the effects of the retail marijuana vote. So we aren't as fully informed as the council is about that matter. So one of the things that I was going to do is to suggest that we listen to what the city has to say and what the council members have to say, their concerns about us, because clearly they have concerns about what we're doing and the way we're doing it and the money that we have or would have in the future, given the imminent marijuana tax vote. So I believe that we can't be can't move forward fully as an authority without the benefit of that, seeing that consultant study, which we can only do in executive session because the information has to be held confidential because it's about sales tax revenue, right? And since we have only 2 marijuana shops, they can't reveal those numbers to us in a public setting. It has to be an executive session. So our hands are sort of tied. I wish we were gonna have the benefit of that executive session first next Tuesday, so then we could all come out of it and say, wow, you know, this is big news, and we really would like to talk to you about that. Without that, maybe we'll get some clues about what the magnitude of that effect would be. But I don't think we can deliberate together next Tuesday with this council. I think we need to ask to receive that information in an executive session at our own meeting, and then have a full discussion ourselves as a board, and then come back to them and have a conversation. And frankly, when Mayor Graham and I met privately to talk about this before I left on my trip in July, that is exactly what I told him. I told him that I appreciated that he'd written up his proposal. I told him that it seemed to me that this was something we needed to take up in our own strategic conversation about budgeting for next year, because we knew that the tax issue might wind up on the Colorado Springs ballot, the marijuana retail marijuana issue. I didn't think that this was something that needed to be considered right away until we understood the full implications and could sit down and make our own plan and then share it with the council. That's the way I've been proceeding from the get-go. The fact that that timeline moved on me is disappointing to me, but there you have it. That's just the way this is unfolding. So I just want to make sure that all of you feel comfortable and confident that you can go into this session next week, ask the questions that you want to ask, and come out of this understanding what it is that we could be doing next, and confident that what we should be doing next meets your intention, the outcome that you want to achieve as board members. Does that make sense? Yeah, Barb.
Well, I guess personally, I just think it's short-sighted for any entity, individual, community to think that they're going to rely upon marijuana funding into the future. Marijuana funding is on the decline. In Colorado, it's going to fall off dramatically in Colorado. It doesn't matter what Colorado Springs is going to do or not do. This thing is just going to level itself out across the country as more and more states subscribe. People decide whether they're hurting their children or not. You know, this whole, separate discussion about marijuana. And I think it's short-sighted for our body or the city of Manitou to not be planning for the future on alternate levels of resources and income generation. I think today's discussion and action that we took will have some bearing on this discussion on Tuesday. And it's probably going to be another, nail in the bedpost or the coffin of how they view our responsibility, what we stand for. And I think we need to make firm statements in that regard if we're called upon, and Jim in his presentation. But I just think regionally, nationally, people got to get past this marijuana issue and get on to bigger propositions about how they develop their communities and what their funding resources are. So.
Thank you.
Good point.
John?
Yeah, I'll just make one comment, a couple of comments maybe about marijuana, and that is that under the current scenario in terms of how we're funded, only the URA is affected by the marijuana sales tax until 9 years from now, when at least that's how I understand it, when we're disbanded. So I don't know that the general city gets marijuana tax money under the current, they do.
It
And
does.
They get a lot.
They get a lot.
A lot. Yeah, absolutely. They get the special tax, they get tax from the state. Yeah, they get a ton.
They
okay,
get 3 times what the URA gets. They get 10% plus 2% from the state.
Right, exactly.
and what
We
was
just,
the,
yeah, we just
what
get
wa-
the 3.6% city sales tax. So that's correct.
okay. So there will be some impact to the URA, but there'll be a bigger impact to the city.
Correct. And that, as Debbie said, that would be really helpful if we'd had that briefing before we have this discussion, but they
Mhm.
weren't comfortable for whatever reason doing that. So,
So when the mayor says that the URA gets a windfall from the URA tax, really the city gets the windfall. And since the marijuana laws in Manitou Springs essentially forced the 2 businesses into the URA, one would assume that this council's policy was to help fund the URA through marijuana sales tax. Just a comment.
That would be one way to look at it, yes. Other comments? Okay, I'm going to try to summarize this. We're going to this special meeting next Tuesday. Would you all raise your hands, those of you who intend to be at this meeting? How many of us intend to be there? Everybody intends to be there. So the only one we really don't know about is Mark Snyder, and that may be dependent on his own family circumstances. And the fact that he's running for re-election. So he might be on the campaign trail, you never know. But it would be nice to have him there. I'll try to encourage him to be there. So we all intend to be there. At this point, we have no action to take or to deliver as a board to the city council. We don't have any formal statement or anything. So I think the conclusion I'm drawing is that we all speak as individuals, individual members of the board. We ask good questions so that we fully understand where they're at, and try to answer their questions as fully as we can. And you all should feel free to say what you need to say. Jim will make the presentation about our projects and our obligations. We've sent them our strategic plan as well as our financials, which we can now update with the execution of this development agreement for the LaFun, and we'll see what happens. Sound fair? Thank you all. I appreciate that you can all be there. And are supportive of really engaging with City Council and helping them to understand what it is we do, and appreciate the role that we play in the future of Manitou. That's important. Okay, any other items of other business? Yes, John.
Just a thought based on today's discussion. Do we need to hire a PR firm to explain to the community what we do and what our charge is?
We actually have a PR firm.
We do.
Mad Woman Marketing. I mean,
Okay,
yeah, I mean, we've tried in the past, I think, kind of routinely to get across to the community and to council members what it is we do. But I think we should not quit trying, because clearly a lot of them really don't understand what our role is, what our purpose is, what the tools are that we're given by state statute. They just don't understand.
Marcy, you're on mute.
I just said, and why it was started in the first place, Anne.
Right. Yes.
But I think it's a constant re-education, because there are new people that come in and leave, come in and leave. And I think that that's a lesson for any organization that is a long-term organization, that you just can't assume that everybody knows what you're doing, because we do have a lot of people coming in and moving out, etc. So I think that's important. Carol was our PR person, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Did we ever, and maybe you can tell me, Anne, did we ever re-engage her?
Oh, yeah, we pay her monthly.
You
Still.
still are paying
Yeah.
her monthly, okay.
She
Then I-
manages our social media. I know that.
Correct.
Well, maybe we need to speak to her again. And maybe Debbie, that falls on your shoulders to visit with her again.
Jim
Maybe
and
we
I can
ask her,
talk about how to re-engage with Carol or talk to her about strategy after this meeting next Tuesday.
In fact, it probably would be a good idea if she were at the meeting next Tuesday. So she knows what's going on.
Yes, Barb.
So I'm trying to understand, can council take action to dissolve this at that meeting or?
No, yes.
Well, they may be able to, Barb, but I would suggest it would be a very, very bad idea.
It takes a first and second reading though.
That
But
what?
yes.
I think since there isn't an ordinance posted for the meeting on Tuesday, I don't think they could actually take action. They could direct that one be developed.
Yes.
And then,
could.
as Farley said, that takes 2 readings, but
Alan, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I walked around knocking a lot of doors the last 2 or 3 years, and I'd say if 1% of the people I talked to even knew we had a URA, that was a big number. People just don't know. My neighborhood, very stable. I think probably 90% of the people have been here for 20 years. And people are just not aware of the URA. It's just not in their scope of interest.
Yeah, not here, not anywhere. It's
Not
just
any, right, not anywhere.
Farley.
I would just like to point out that I think the majority of people don't know what a lot of groups, like if you asked the average person, what is PPRTA, they would not be able to tell you what that means or who they are, or how it's funded or any of those things. Or even PARAB to some extent, an OSAC. We operate in circles where we are aware of these other groups because we work with them. But I would say that average citizens don't know what PARAB is or OSAC or any of those TOPS or any of those kinds of groups. So I think that there's a limit to how much we can actually inform people. But one thing that I think that a media person such as Carol or somebody that does social media, what they could do is highlight what URAs around Colorado do that are positive. Like when people see Ivy Wild and the principal's office where they go and get a really good martini, they don't know that that was funded by our URA. So I think that's the connection piece that can be made through our social media person or a PR person. Is what is it that you can get out of this URA, so that when they hear URA, they might think Ivy Wild, and they love Ivy Wild because they get a good martini.
One of the concerns that I have is that now that the mayor has raised this issue and has written about it in the bulletin, now we are on the minds of more people. While it is true that we can do some better PR works, a better marketing strategy, or start using Carol's contract more, we also have the ability as individual board members to write the letter to the editor, speak up more publicly, do those kinds of things. And I know that that's been suggested to me by some ones of you, and maybe it's also time to ramp that up as well. If you're so inclined to write the letter to the editor talking about what we do and why it's so important, even saying it at next Tuesday's meeting doesn't make a lot of sense, it won't be heard by a lot of people unless the press shows up. So perhaps it's time for us to take some individual action as well. And there's nothing that precludes us from doing that. So what do you think about that idea?
I like that idea, Debbie. I think we have another problem, which is not us individually or even as a board, is that the paper doesn't have anybody to cover us. They don't even, I don't know how they're covering the city council. They do not have a direct, since Jack Elder died.
That's true.
They're using somebody who may be listening to the tape and then writing a report, but they don't know, there's no connection. And I think there's some concern about the longevity of our little paper. So there are more issues than just writing a letter. That's my whole point. I think the letter is a great idea. My point is, how do we get the news out? And my other beef that I've had for years is that we continue to use acronyms for open space or for the park board. We refuse to use the, so people say, well, what is OSAC? Or what is PARA? They don't know what organization it stands for. And we continue to play that game. And it's not a game, but I mean, it's easier to get it into the paper or however it's distributed, the information. But we don't realize that people do not know, as someone pointed out, that if they're not involved in the organization, they don't know what it stands for.
Yeah, exactly. John, do you have any last remarks about this topic? Do you want to put it on the September agenda? And we can have some report from Jim and or me about what we could and should be doing?
Well, I think it
Or
would be
even-
nice.
Yeah.
I think it would be nice to have Carol maybe outline some steps that we could take.
Mhm.
I mean, to me, that's the first step. And then we could direct her to do whichever of those we think appropriate at the next meeting.
Does that sound like a good idea to all of you? We'll ask Carol for her recommendations, some strategies.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Let's do that. Okay. Thank you all so much for your help today. I really am proud to be part of this group. I know we're in a difficult spot right now. There's a lot of chaos and who knows, maybe we won't even have a September meeting. No, I'm kidding. Of course, we'll still be here by then.
We'll be here.
We'll be here. Thank you very much for your help today, for participating next Tuesday. I'll look forward to seeing you all then. And with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No opposition. Amazing. Thank you so much. We'll see you on Tuesday.
Thanks, Debbie.
Thanks.